The Chronic Illness Therapist podcast is meant to be a place where people with chronic illnesses can come to feel heard, seen, and safe while listening to mental health therapists and other medical professionals talk about the realities of treating difficult conditions. This might be a new concept for you, one in which you never have to worry about someone inferring that it's all in your head. We dive deep into the human side of treating complex medical conditions and help you find professionals that leave you feeling hopeful for the future. I hope you love what you learn here, and please consider leaving a review or sharing this podcast with someone you love. This podcast is meant for educational purposes only. For specific questions related to your unique circumstances, please contact a licensed medical professional in your state of residence. Bree Crisp is a licensed clinical social worker in Charlotte, North Carolina. She's currently working in private practice with a primary focus on women's issues, healthcare advocacy, and chronic pain. Bree also has a graduate certificate from Xavier University to be a medical trauma-informed professional. Bringing her own lived experience with chronic illness and the desire to advocate for others has become her why in all that she does. Bree also enjoys teaching, where she completed her master's degree, UNC Charlotte. Of all the hats she wears, being a dog mom to Brody is her favorite interest. Thanks, Bree, for being here. What kind of dog is Brody?
He's a Dachshund.
Oh, okay, awesome. Tell us a little bit about your practice and what you kind of are loving in your practice recently, and then maybe a little bit about, I know we're going to talk a little bit about endometriosis today and a couple of things. So tell us a little bit about where you practice and what you're loving.
Yeah. So I am based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, but I am licensed all across the state. So the perks with telehealth is I have access to anyone in North Carolina as well as South Carolina. What I really love about my practice is meeting women from all walks of life. And the biggest thing with telehealth is it really helps with folks with chronic illness, because I find that a lot of people can come in with their heating pads on, where it would be a lot harder to kind of travel and do things on flare-up days. I really just love working with all types of women, and I also have a variety of population. Just my biggest thing is chronic illness, and really just being able to walk a journey with someone that you typically wouldn't be able to see otherwise.
And I know we talked a little bit about your kind of personal experience with endometriosis, and I'm wondering if you could kind of share a little bit about how, like, your experience helped you then decide to work with this population. Just kind of a little bit more about your story and mixing that in with your story as a therapist as well.
Yeah. So my journey is very similar to a lot of women's journey, where it takes about 7 to 10 years to get a proper diagnosis. So I have been kind of dealing with this even before I was a therapist, even before my college days. And it kind of fell into my lap. I like to say that I share my story. I just happened to be having surgery, and I was telling my folks that, hey, I'm going to be out for a couple of weeks. I'm having surgery, and I'm very close with a lot of my clients in the sense that I've worked with them for years. And so they're like, are you okay? Or, genuinely concerned. And I was like, yes, some of them I felt more comfortable saying, I am having surgery for endometriosis. And it wasn't until I said that one of my female clients says, what is endometriosis? And I just kind of gave a description of it. And she said, I really think that I have it. And I was like, oh, well, okay, well, here's the steps, that we can take and things. And so it really wasn't until I said the word endometriosis in my practice, and being very transparent, that I really kind of turned my practice around a little bit and just said, okay, let me shift a little bit to what can we do with endometriosis groups? How can I really market to helping these folks navigate the medical system and navigate all of the physical and mental health aspects that come with that. So I like to say that it found me, but I think just being vulnerable and sharing the word endometriosis and even just saying that really just kind of made everything fall into place.
That makes so much sense and such a good reminder of what it's like to share our stories and how it helps. It only helps. Um, but we often hold back for so many different reasons. So, wow, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that's really cool that it came about that way. I'm curious, like, if you can share a little bit about your history with endo and like when you were struggling and didn't know what you had, what like medical care was like growing up, what you feel like you did right, what you feel like was not done right for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I am in my late 20s. And I started having symptoms when I was in middle school. So middle school would have been, starting at age 12, 13. So um, I just had symptoms that were different than my friends because I think growing up as a millennial, we got excited to have our cycle. Like that was so fun to go to the store, get a cute little purse, get a cute bag, and that was kind of locker room and bathroom talk when I was in middle school. It was kind of those whispers of who was becoming a woman, is kind of what we called it. Um, and so I just remember a lot of the girls had different stories than me. For me, I was missing school and I would wear a jacket and I would have to tie it across my waist because by the end of the day, my pants had spots on them and that was very embarrassing. And so I was just navigating a different journey, it felt like, than other girls. Other girls were, smiling and happy and loved craving chocolate. And I was at home, kind of doubled over in pain. My mom would have to like do all these things for me, take me to the doctor. And at the time, because I was so young, I was seeing a pediatrician. And, even though it wasn't that long ago, I was in middle school in early 2000s. It still was not talked about that I've never heard the word of endometriosis until I was in my 20s. Um, but it wasn't talked about in my pediatrician. They were like, "Oh, well, it's normal. She should be cramping. This is what a woman goes through, but here's some birth control." Um, and so, my mom kept saying, "But this is a lot. She's really missing school. This is really impacting a lot of her livelihood as a 12-year-old." And so I think for me, going through that, obviously when you're so young, I didn't start seeing a OBGYN until I was a teenager, like mid-teens. And so, it was just kind of the treatment for me was here's birth control, try this one, try this one. And I think I have been on about 10 to 15 different birth controls since starting birth control when I was 12. And I think for me, it was just a lot of a band-aid versus, this is what could be happening versus, well, you're just a woman. And it wasn't until after graduate school that I really started to be able to advocate for myself and say, but, this something is wrong. And to find a doctor that specialized in women's health and endometriosis specific.
Yeah, when you were changing all of those birth controls, was it because like just the symptoms you were having just weren't going away, or were you also getting other symptoms like headaches and stuff like that?
Yeah, so a lot of it was, the extreme heavy bleeding. And they were really trying to control that with the pain where I would actually end up passing out a lot of times. And so a lot of my symptoms were kind of that back and leg pain. And the reason for all the switches is they were like, "Well, try this one. Well, this one could work better." Instead of actually talking to me about my family's history. Because now I know family history. My mom has endometriosis. A lot of my female aunts and like family members have endo. Um, no one was really talking about women or my family history until I was bringing it up. And I kept saying, "But my mom has this, but my aunt has this," and they were like, "Yeah, no, that couldn't be it." So really, I had to kind of go in and say, "Okay, all these birth controls are not helping." And then just kind of fight my way through that.
Wow. Yeah. Which brings us into advocacy. And it's so amazing. amazing to me that they were not even caring about, like, family history. Did your mom was she diagnosed with endo?
It was definitely, I don't know the exact year, but it's definitely after she had me, and it was later in life.
Was before
Her
you were a teen?
um, it was after.
Okay, okay. I see. Man. So, would you say you were the impetus then for other people to get the diagnosis, or was it all random?
In my family,
Yeah.
I think it was all random. Um, and also I think part of that too is it wasn't talked about. I like to say I'm the loud one in my family. But when I started talking about endo, it was just like some of my cousins and my aunts would be like, "Oh yeah, I have that too." So we really weren't talking about it.
I that's such it's so frustrating. Like, we get deemed like the loud one, it has such like a negative connotation, and it's like, oh, yeah, either you're too loud or you're too this, you're too much. Like, those things come up for us, and then it's like, oh, see, this is proof that, like, you're just an anxious woman, and then we get all of these like, ah, this it's just because of your anxiety. But I've been talking about this a lot recently. It's more like we're the canaries in the coal mine that can alert people to, like, this is going on. No one else wants to see it. Nobody else is hearing it, but we are willing to be loud about it, even if no one wants to hear it. And then it's a trickle effect into other people getting diagnosed, or us just getting our own answers. So we have to be loud. What has that been like for you? Just like being the loud one, or like having to advocate so hard?
I It's exhausting. Um, and I think for me, I through this, because I didn't have my surgery until the end of last year. Um, and so for me, I just said, I want to share my story. If it helps one person, it's worth it all. And I really go back to that client that I ended up just saying, hey, I'm not gonna be seeing folks for 2 weeks. Um, and I feel that advocating and being loud helps. It just has to help one person, and then that one person helps one person, and that one person helps one person. I'm a big believer in that your story there's even a quote, and I cannot remember who says it, but one day this I think it's Brené Brown. One day this story that you tell will be a roadmap for someone else. And so I'm just a big believer that just me saying the word endometriosis and educating people on what that is, maybe when they see their daughter or their sister or their aunt have symptoms, they're like, "Hey, let me tell you about endometriosis." Um, and so it's been exhausting, but it's those moments where I'm able to educate someone and connect with someone that makes it all worth it.
Can we talk a little bit more about the emotional responses, either within your own story or things that you see over and over again? Like, what are some of the common emotional things that happen, maybe even like before you get a diagnosis, when you get a diagnosis? Like, kind of walk us through, like, if somebody were trying to find themselves in this story, what might they be feeling?
Mhm. I hear gaslighting a lot. And I hear a lot of women want to give up and this exhaustion where it's why am I fighting? I'm kind of fighting against a wall. And so I think that a lot of women that I've heard, and it's intertwined with my story, is a lot of women feel helpless and hopeless. Um, they feel exhausted and just kind of overwhelmed. I think there's a lot of aspects that are overwhelming. It's overwhelming financially, it's overwhelming emotionally, physically. It's just a very layered um, diagnosis. I don't think that there's many diagnoses that are this hard to fight for. And of course, my women have to feel it. And I think women are already feeling so many different things for so many different reasons. And I think this just adds another layer of impacts with self esteem and anxiety and depression. Because there is a huge link when you're in chronic pain all the time that you have a higher risk of depression.
What is so hard about diagnosing endo?
Yeah. So for endometriosis, in order to get a diagnosis, you have to have a positive pathology report, and that can only be done through surgery. It's a laparoscopic surgery. And what they do is they take tissue out that either mimics or looks like endometriosis to the eye, and that gets sent off to pathology, and then that's confirmed with endometriosis. And so, what's so tricky about that is the cut. So say that the endo is right here, but they end up cutting just 1 millimeter from that, and that gets sent off. It's also hard to find a provider that actually specializes in endometriosis excision surgery. Um, because there's not a lot of providers that do that, and you would need to go to a specialist surgeon. So there's a lot of challenges with access. I'm fortunate that there's a great surgeon in North Carolina, but a lot of women don't have that. Also, insurance is another barrier, um, because some insurance sees this as a way to get a diagnosis, so it's exploratory and not covered by medical coverage. So that's another obstacle that women face to get diagnosed. And so it just adds to that long, those years that takes to find someone and to get diagnosed. Um, and so that's,
I want to pause. Like,
yeah,
this means that before the surgery, there actually cannot be a definite diagnosis.
not an official confirmed diagnosis. They can suspect. So I've heard a lot of say like, suspect endo, and that's what it was for me. Is well, it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck. It's a duck, but until we actually have that tissue taken to pathology, and that's another obstacle too. Is there's two different types of surgery. It's excision, which is the cutting, which that's where we get to the roots. And then there's ablation, which is burning. And it's kind of like if you just take the top off the dandelion, the root is still there. And so women still have endometriosis even after ablation. And so it's finding the right surgeon, the right surgery, and the right treatment. And then some surgeons just aren't specialized in endo, and they don't know what endometriosis looks like in order to take it out. And so even women who have surgery can still have symptoms if the disease wasn't removed. And so that's what adds to kind of this obstacle of, well, you had surgery, and it's hard to go through surgery. I'll tell you that, 4 years ago when they were like, well, you would have to have surgery. I was like, no, I'm okay. I'm not ready for that. And so we don't do enough education. But you can have suspicions of endo, but in order to get a clear diagnosis, you do have to have surgery.
Wow. That, of course, would make it so. Yeah. I mean, who wants to go in and have surgery when you don't even know for sure? That's
Yeah.
really, yes. What else comes along with this? What happens after how do you get to a point where you're like, yes, let's do the surgery, even though this is just suspected and I don't know for sure, but like, what gets you to that place?
Yeah. I think for me, and I want to not speak for all women, but I think for me and a lot of women, it's you get to kind of a breaking point of I've tried everything that I can. I've done the birth control. I've done pelvic floor PT. I've, tried to, eliminate certain foods. I've really tried to do this, and it's impacting my quality of life. And so I think for me, even before I even was pushed back to the OR, I was like, I want to go home. I don't want to do this. Um, and so I think that there's no like 100% clear that you're like, I absolutely want to have surgery, but it's scary. But I think that for me, it was impacting my ability to be present with my clients. It was impacting my ability to even walk my dog. Um, and getting that surgery was such a relief in the sense of mentally and physically. But I think that you just get to a point where it's like enough is enough. I have to do this. I have to do this one big thing, and it could change everything. And the worst case scenario is I stay right where I am.
Right, right. That makes sense. So you've tried that's a part of the trauma, right? It's you've tried so many things.
Mhm.
And then it's this place of desperation that does get you to the surgery, but you've already experienced all of these things that like didn't work. So I'm curious if you can speak to that experience a little bit and then what you felt like after the surgery.
Yeah. I it it goes to that exhaustion of where, you feel that you've tried everything and you've tried everything that was kind of given to you. And then a lot of chronic illness folks will do their own research and kind of go rogue on some things. And so you get to the point where, you know, you almost kind of blame yourself as like, why is my body not getting better? But the thing that's not talked about is surgery is the gold standard for endometriosis. And so if we talked about the removal of the disease, and unfortunately, endo does grow back. It never stops growing, but it can slow the growth. And so I think if surgery was kind of the top treatment option, and then we looked at birth control and pelvic floor therapy, we looked at that underneath, I think that would really change the narrative and change the mental load that women have to go through in order to get treatment.
Yeah.
And then to talk about after my surgery, so I just had my second surgery this May, so May 2024. Um, and I feel so much relief. I don't know kind of what it's like to feel quote normal because what is normal, but because I've been dealing with this disease since I was 12 years old. But I find that I'm not in pain every single day. I don't have to use my heating pad every single day. I still have flare-ups. I still have symptoms. Unfortunately, the disease is a whole body disease. So you'll deal with fatigue, brain fog, hip pain, leg pain. It's different for every woman, but um, it's definitely been worth it. That surgery was so worth it. And that goes back to that right treatment, right surgeon, um, just kind of the right time. And so it's definitely given me more quality of life back and then still navigating the symptoms that I feel a couple weeks ahead of the month, but it's nothing like it was every day.
So what is it like then knowing that you need the surgery more than you will likely need surgery more than once? I think that's I'm wondering if a lot of people go into surgery hoping like this is it. I'm hearing a lot of acceptance in your voice and tone, which I think probably sounds really helpful and just kind of accept like it just is what it is. And like you prepare for it each time you can prepare for it better. That's kind of what I'm gathering, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. I think that it's kind of a multi-layer. Like, it's frustrating that you would have to have surgery again because surgery is hard on your body. Um, it also is expensive, and you have to take time off from work and take off time from your life, and then that's not fun. And then if you have to travel, you kind of have to plan around finding that and navigating all those. But I think that, and some women don't have to have surgery for years. I could have to have another surgery in a year or 20 years from now, or never again. And so I think really having this um, kind of idea that surgery is the way to get the tissue out and is the most helpful way. I also love to think that one day we're gonna have a cure for endo, that we're gonna have a way to a cure would be amazing, but I would love to have a different treatment option. Even though they do minimally invasive surgery, it's still a major surgery. You still have at least 4 cuts, if not more, depending on your location. So it's still a really hard surgery on your body because you're having it in your abdomen, which is the hardest place to recover. And so I think that it's hard to say, um, to kind of accept when I'll have surgery again. It's kind of like it may be down the road. But I think once you find an amazing surgeon, like I will feel better going into a third surgery with my surgeon that I did because my second one was successful. And so I think that having that bond and relationship with a surgeon and that be your primary surgeon for your endo journey as long as, you're comfortable with them and as long as they're still practicing, I think that really lessens the trauma. Because I know that I will go in my third surgery and I'll be like, I'm a pro at this by now, and I know my surgeon. So I'm not, going in hyper vigilant and not knowing her work because the second one was successful. So I think it does help to have the same surgeon, if they're a great surgeon.
Was your first one successful too, but it just grew back? Or would you say it wasn't okay, it wasn't successful at all, and that's why you had the second surgery? I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and one of the biggest things that ties in with endometriosis is medical trauma, which is something that I am obviously practice with. So my first surgery was a completely different surgeon. And it was not successful because of they did not remove the endometriosis. And they actually ended up causing more scar tissue, which is in medical terms is adhesions. And a lot of it was in locations around kind of my intestines and my bowels. And so the way that it was described to me is you've got to kind of search through the bowels and the intestines, right? You got to kind of look through them. And that's where endo is really tricky is it hides because it can be so, so small. And so you really have to have a surgeon who takes their time and is very delicate and looks through all the reproductive organs, the bladder, the kidneys, the bowel, the intestines, all regions. And for me, a lot of it was missed with my intestines. My intestines were actually not in the correct position. And so having my surgery last October and then going in for surgery beginning of May, I actually had a consult with her. I was my new surgeon in March. And even showing the photos and the notes, she, without even seeing what my organs or anything looked like, she noted that things were missed. And so that for me was very invalidating, because I was going in so hopeful that, this was going to be my first surgery. This was going to be really helpful. And unfortunately, though, the first surgeon, just really let me down, if I'm being honest, and actually created more problems, because the adhesions, the way that it was explained to me is adhesions are kind of like Elmer's glue. And so imagine that being poured all over your insides. So it sticks and hardens things together. And so what that did to my organs is it stuck them together, and made things very, very painful for me. Um, and, just the amount of money and recovery and all of those things that were, that I had to navigate not even 7 months, from my first surgery to my second surgery, really just was frustrating and has really even pushed me to even be more of an advocate of, okay, these are the surgeons we need to look for, um, and these are the questions you need to ask, and this is kind of where you should look at going, get all the information. Not that I did anything wrong,
You just didn't
but
know. Yeah.
yeah,
And that was my next question really is like, how did you find your first surgeon? What maybe wasn't, what was missed there? Not because you were doing something wrong, but because you just didn't know. So we can kind of help other people know and hopefully avoid the same mistake. Although just knowing that a lot of first times, actually Brene Brown, she says FFT, the fucking first time. That's like, and it's true with everything, whether it's like the first time of like doing a math assignment or getting surgery, like no matter what it is, there's mistakes that are going to be made. It's frustrating. It's hard. It can, and depending on how you respond to hard situations, that then plays into how you're going to handle what's happening. But so just with that in mind, um, yeah. How did you find your first surgeon? What was a mistake that maybe was made, that you could have avoided if you had known?
right. And, I think when I shared earlier about, they're very rare to find. It is very hard to find an endo excision specialist. Um, the way that I found mine is I was actually in the same city as one of them, but also they took insurance. So again, it's that access. So they were in network with my insurance. And even though, there was going to be a cost with it, my insurance was going to cover a majority of it. And so for me, even meeting with them and having a consult with them, I felt, you know, very comfortable in the sense of like they knew what they were doing. Um, and you know, a thing too is a lot of providers will say they specialize in endo, but it's actually misleading if they don't do it the gold standard way and they don't check all your organs. They're actually failing you more than they're helping. And so for me, I felt comfortable with them. He really had a lot of, insight. He was very kind of looking back, he very much was confident in himself. Um, Even though I would ask questions and like have everything prepared and be like, what should I do post-op? What should I do this? And he kind of treated it as I'm going in for like getting my teeth cleaned and then I'm going home. Looking back, I don't know if there's anything I would have necessarily could have done differently. The reason for my second surgery is I
That
yep,
experience for a moment, I'm wondering, like,
yeah.
so yeah, he was like confident, but what I'm hearing is that he actually a little bit of like, this is this is big, or this is like having to have a little bit more of a conversation. This isn't just some easy dental cleaning. Like, here is what we're doing, and this is really hard. And actually a little bit more of that, that's the word I'm looking for, not trepidation, but like maybe trepidation is what I'm looking for. A little bit more um curiosity or preparedness, like, to actually you don't want someone who's scared, but to have someone who's not just like, "Yeah, easy peasy, I've got this," which, of course, would make anyone feel comfortable, but what you're saying is this is a hard like, we don't you might think people wanna hear, "I've got this is super easy, we're gonna" that might get rid of some of the anxiety up front, but it actually means you're missing some of the hardship of what you're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think where kind of the gaslighting piece comes in is, and I'm not sure if this is a practice model or if it's an insurance model. But a lot of times with my first surgeon, even the label for insurance was if endometriosis is present. So for me, I was even gaslit every single time, even before I was pushed back to the ER, was I signed a consent form that said if endometriosis is present. And so it was like, if it's endo, if it's endo, if it's endo. And I just remember being like, well, what if it's not? What if this is all in my head and I am a weak woman who should just be dealing with her period?
Oh,
And so I think that, and I really don't know if it's an insurance issue or not. For me, my second surgeon never said if, and none of my consent forms said if. And it's
wow.
kind of what we talk about as therapists, right? It's that language changing. Like that if just sounds very invalidating. And so I think that, you know, it was very much gaslighting through the whole aspect of like, well, you're going to feel great after this. And he even was sharing stories of, I've changed women's lives and women told me that they got their lives back. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want that. Like, I'm so excited. I'm in my late 20s. I want to be able to do these things. And, you know, after that surgery, I ended up having many more symptoms and I was actually not even able to stand up straight. I kind of walked at an angle for several weeks, and even just had to have my partner, like, hold me and do everything for me. Um, and I think that really made me internalize that, well, this surgery didn't work for you because it's not endo, and somehow you're worse now, so you're not a success story.
Oh, yeah, I can see how that would happen. Okay, walk me through like how did you get out of that and end up with your next surgery so close 7 months later? Like, yeah, wow. I'm sure so many people are going to hear this and be like, that's exactly, yes. And like, hopefully can help them get to the right surgeon.
Yeah. So I will say that I wanted to give up. I the whole month of October pretty much in my, like, recovery, so I had a lot of downtimes. And I went back and forth and of, okay, I'm going to just not even try anymore. I'm just gonna suck it up. This didn't work. Um, because my pathology report, they'll take samples, and it's best for them to take samples, to send a pathology of everything they see. So this can be anywhere from like 10 to 20 or more samples. this surgeon only took 4 samples from me. And so my surgery actually came back as everything but endometriosis. It was like describing endo without saying endo. So I actually, my first surgery had a negative pathology report for endometriosis off of 4 samples. None of these 4 samples were actually where my endo was on my second surgery, and I'll get into that in a moment. And so the gaslighting really began because what I had done was I had started talking to my clients about endo. I had said, "Oh, I'm going to start this group." And then I got a negative pathology report, and the surgeon ended up being like, "Oh," because a big thing was the surgeon in post-op, he was like, "Yeah, I found endometriosis. It was all on your left side." And even me calling back, this was in severe pain, so I had to keep calling back to the nurse line. And they're like, "Yeah, we look like, it looks like we removed endo here. These are the things you can do, take extra ibuprofen, things like that." And so everybody kept saying endo to me. And then one day they were like, "Oh, it's not endo." In my post-op 4 weeks later, they were like, "It's not endo. It's IBS," which IBS is a blanket term, and not it. IBS is a symptom of endo, but it's not.
It's not like a disease. It's a
Right,
cluster of symptoms that happen as a result of something else going on in your body.
right, and so
Something else is as big as endo. Other times it's not. I just want to be clear for listeners. Like sometimes it is like a matter of changing up your diet or something a little bit easier. But so just to not like fear monger, but also know that it also can be the sign and symptom of something bigger, like endo.
absolutely, and they coincide, with IBS and endo. But he was like, "We're just going to send you to GI," and I just remember, because I had so much time on my I just remember researching other providers and looking at what my other options were, because really what I wanted, once I mustered up the energy and could even wrap my head around, I don't want to give up, but I have no energy to keep fighting, is I was like, I'm going to just give it one more try. And I remember telling my partner, I was like, "I'm just going to try once. And then if this person says it's not endo, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop pushing the issue and I'm going to let it go. But I can't let it go until I get a second opinion." And so I actually found a surgeon who, she was out of network, and it was a little scary, which meant private pay, of course. But I actually found them, and I was like, I want to do a consult with them. And so I ended up saying, okay, whatever the cost is, it's going to be worth it if I can just get a second opinion. And so the consult, I believe the consult was free. But I ended up going in, providing all of my photos. I had, like, 3 photos, all of my notes, all of my history, and they were like, "Yeah, I mean, you are a textbook for endometriosis." And just the way and the team that I worked with, my second surgery, you work with everyone on the team. So you work with the PA, you of course work with the surgeon, you work with the billing department, and you work with the front desk and the nurse. And so everybody from the moment you call to the moment you log on to your virtual appointment for your consult, everyone is so nice and so validating. And even with that 30-minute consult, I was like, "Thank you for listening to me," because she explained to me how some surgeons, unfortunately she hears this all the time. She was saying sometimes, pathology will describe everything but endo. They will describe flu, but not say the word flu. And so from that, I felt heard and I felt safe going to them. Um, and so the thought of having another surgery and having time off from work, especially with private practice, is, just the thought of that was exhausting, overwhelming, all of the feelings. But at that point in time, when I started making the second opinion this year, I was bedbound a lot of my days, putting on my mask to go to work, and I felt like I owed it to myself, because I felt like the first surgeon took so much from me, and I could have stopped there. And if I can tell the listeners, please don't stop with a bad surgeon. It has absolutely nothing to do with you. You're not a bad person. You're not a bad patient. To keep fighting. Because if we give up, the system wins. And I say that probably 100 times a week. We give up, we stop trying, the system wins. And so if I would have stopped, I probably wouldn't be having this interview with you. I would probably be in bed with a heating pad, and miserable. And, I can't advocate enough for a second opinion, second, third, fourth opinion. I've known women who have had several surgeons. And the downside is a lot of the surgeons are out of network, they're private pay. And what I have learned from this surgeon is she says, I like to take my time with women, and insurance doesn't like that I take, and the system don't like that I take my.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. Even in my other interviews that I've done around endo on this podcast, like, yeah, it's private pay and it's really unfortunate. And also, at the risk of sounding very privileged, I think it's important to think about it as an investment in yourself. And if you can't afford that investment, there's nothing wrong with you. It's not me saying, oh, well, you're just choosing to not invest in yourself. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. But how can we look at this in a way of like, I'm saving for a down payment on a house while I'm saving for a surgery? And it's unfair. It's really unfair. No one is no one is saying that that's a fair choice, but you owe it to yourself to prioritize your body. I'm curious now, like, what does it feel like on the other side of this surgery? And also, were they able to fix some of the damage, or is that, yeah? Okay. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So my first surgery was less than an hour, which now looking back is just unheard of. That should never have been less than an hour. My second surgery was over 3 hours. And in order for her to even go in and remove the endo, she had to cut through all of the adhesions and um, cut the cut my organs off of my abdomen wall, in order to even see where the endometriosis was. And so, she corrected and removed everything. And the really awesome thing about her is she gives a video. She does a before and after video, and I have over 30 photos on a flash drive. And she also took my partner who took me to this hospital. She took him into an office and she reviews all of your photos and she walks you through your story. So she's telling your story from the inside out, and it's beautiful and sad and validating and hopeful all at once. I have that video on my phone. He recorded it. It's a 13-minute video on my phone. I still look at that video when I'm doubting myself and I'm doubting my symptoms, because her voice is so kind and I can actually see what's inside. And I think that's where endo is such an invisible illness. Like, you can see that we're doubled over, or you can see that we're out, being awesome members of society, but you can never just kind of go inward and see what was in there. And so to have that video and to have those photos for forever is so, so helpful. Especially when I've wanted to gaslight myself, or the medical field has gaslit me at appointments. I'm like, no, she could have made this up. There's no making this up.
Unheard of too, because most medical professionals are like, don't record, don't record, don't record, because they're risking liability. Yeah. That's beautiful and amazing that she did that.
Yeah. Yeah. And she even said, yeah, of course you get consent at first. You're like, can he record me, or can your person record you? And I'm like, absolutely. And so she wants you to see that. She wants you to see, what she did. And so she gives you the before and after. So truly, I can see that all the bad stuff, all the adhesions, all the lesions, which are endometriosis, they're gone. And so just the care that she did makes private pay worth it. I don't know if she was doing this when she was accepting insurance with a different system, because now she's on her own. The care that I got going from someone who took my insurance to someone who did, it is so worth it. It's scary to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to pay all this money. Because I'll be honest, we were like, we want to buy a house this year. And I'm like, I have to have surgery. And so it really kind of delays a lot of things financially, but there are things that you can do to work through the financials. Like, They can set up payment plans that are interest free.
Of course, that would be entirely it is so scary. So I'm curious how you feel about this decision. Like, maybe we wanted to buy a house, but like what and also what are some of the financial things that can help here?
Mhm. Yeah. So I think like you said, it's the investment in your health. It's, it comes down to quality of life and you are only one person. And you're worth betting on, you're worth taking these risks for. Um, and so I think there's a big acceptance piece. Okay, yes, I'm going to have surgery again, and that's going to be a financial strain. But if I don't, I'm not going to be able to enjoy these things in the future. And it could also get worse to where, I have to either wait because she's booked out or, I'm not going to be able to do the things that I even want to enjoy. And so while it did feel that things were being delayed or held back, I know now that I'm going to be able to enjoy these things more. Um, and so the financials is, there's different programs that you can like kind of get a loan, so to speak, or like a credit card for these providers. And it will be interest free and you set your monthly payments. So it's not just you having to come up with all of this money at once. Now, there are kind of like some folks have deposits that they have to put on to hold their appointment, but then that goes to their entire surgery. And so for me, with my second surgeon, I just paid for her service out of pocket. And then, of course, I had surgery at a hospital. So anesthesia, their nurses, all that went on my insurance. So it's kind of you're paying for their fee, and then the facility would be on their insurance. And of course, I'm sure it's a case by case basis. But you're really just paying for the surgical service privately.
That makes sense. So that helps with some of the costs. I think the ballpark I've heard before was around $30,000. Is that what
Oh,
is
wow. Oh my gosh. No, I would say ballpark is like 10 to 15,000
okay?
for where I went.
Maybe the person I talked to before had to also pay a lot of the hot, like maybe the a whole thing with it. So yeah. So what you're
Yeah.
saying is it doesn't have to even be that much. It can be 10, 15, which is not nothing, but again, it's an investment. Like, it is 10 to $15,000 for the sake of a life. Like, what good is a house if you're gonna be doubled over in the bedroom? Like, maybe you have a comfy bedroom, but it's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that obviously insurance deductibles, all that plays into it. And it's an expensive disease anyways. I think on average women spend so much money. I would think tens of thousands.
In the trying to figure out and having a lot of things that aren't right, or like even once you know what it is, like then there's still all these extra expenses. Which one is it?
I would say both. I would say, when you're going through kind of getting diagnosed, you may end up at GI, you may end up at urology, you may end up doing pelvic floor therapy. You may try different medications.
Right.
Um, excuse me. And then after, um, of course, you're, going through pelvic floor therapy to kind of strengthen those muscles that were kind of tightened and not in the best of places.
Yeah.
But also, I think a lot of, treatments where we invest in heating pads. I've been through a ton of heating pads because they stop working after a while. And then you just get hopeful and you want to try like these creams or this medication or these vitamins. And so I think it's just an expensive disease all around because you want to keep trying these things. Some are necessary and some are marketed towards women who you would never need them anyways. Um, so in preparing for surgery, of course, you have to have certain things, or you would want to have certain for your post-op and recovery.
That makes sense. And it was helpful to hear some of the specifics. Like, I know pelvic floor therapy, which is really helpful, but also, usually out of pocket. Um, what are then you mentioned like urology, and then you said some other things. So what are some other things that people would want to prepare for post surgery?
Yeah. And I think it depends on where the location is of your endo. So a lot of it, for women what's in your bowels, you may go to GI afterward, or you may have even been to GI before. So when endo affects your kidneys or any bladder function, you could be sent to urology. Um, I also think that a therapist is amazing before and after because your mental health is a priority and it really does take a toll on you, just emotionally afterwards and even going into surgery. Pelvic floor therapy, a lot of this is covered by insurance, but of course you have to pick certain things and meet, they cap out on certain amount of visits that you could have. And so some PTs that are in pelvic floor specialties are private practice, but there are plenty that take insurance. Um, some folks do like massage therapy or acupuncture or chiropractic, um, office visits and things like that. And so kind of like a holistic approach and what makes sense for you financially and what makes sense for your symptoms. But it really just becomes about symptom management. Of course, OBGYN care. Some women have surgery and then go into fertility treatments, which is thousands and thousands of dollars. And so kind of really having just an integrated system of care is really important. Then dietitians and nutritionists as well.
That makes perfect sense. Are you able to talk a little bit about fertility and how endo affects it? Is it very, very different from person to person, or is there also a general kind of thing, whether it's makes fertility not as likely even like post surgery or what? Yeah, let's just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I can only speak to it from what I know from research and from clients, but a lot of folks, if they have never had a diagnosis or treatment for endometriosis, a lot of times when a woman goes to get pregnant and they have fertility issues, a lot of times they will look at endometriosis as being one of the causes as to why a woman can't get pregnant. And so sometimes that fertility journey leads to endometriosis surgery. And then sometimes, and it is kind of a person by person basis, but a lot of times, um, in order to get pregnant, a woman will have her surgery. She'll have all the kind of disease removed, and then she'll be able to get pregnant easier. Sometimes women with the disease aren't able to get pregnant naturally. So there's obviously IVF and other treatments, but it has been kind of from what I've heard, a higher success rate um, when a woman has had surgery and then goes to get pregnant, kind of like within that year, it can make it easier because that disease is removed.
That's good to hear and to know, like, that yes, it might still be a struggle, there's a journey around it, but it's not like getting your ovaries taken out or having a hysterectomy, in which case you're not gonna have a child after that. There's a possibility, there's a hope, and especially if the surgery's done well.
Absolutely. And I forgot to mention that in the beginning, but the goal of a good surgeon is to not remove organs. And that's something that you really want to ask when you go into your pre-op or when you go into interview and meet with these surgeons is what is your thoughts on organ removal? And um a lot of times appendix is removed or gallbladder because it can kind of be all in there. You don't really need those organs, so they can just kind of toss those to the side. But a hysterectomy is not a cure for endometriosis, and so I would very caution the listeners that if someone says, "Oh, well, you're going to need a hysterectomy," it doesn't cure endo. Um, and it's not the standard treatment. Just like for me, if I had a hysterectomy, I would still have endometriosis because mine is in my bowel and my intestines. And so, even the goal, and they even ask you when you have your endo treatment is where are you at with fertility? Are you wanting to have children? And do you have children? Do you want us to protect that as much as possible? And so you can really make that known. Um, because you don't want to wake up, and I've heard really sad stories where women have woke up and their ovary is gone, and they had no idea. And so, really, the goal is to keep these organs, and just remove the disease around it.
So one of the questions you would ask a surgeon pre-surgery is do you remove organs? And then you hope that their answer is no, absolutely not. Or is the answer sometimes like, we try at all costs not to, but we might have to? What is that answer? What can it look like?
Yeah, you would want to kind of look for an answer that obviously align with your values, but you would want it to be more of our goal is not to go in and remove organs. Our goal is to look at the disease, see what we need to remove, because all of this can be removed on your organs. a surgeon who is very delicate will remove the disease around these and not have to take anything out, and I think there's a really there's it's scary because you're like, "Don't take these organs out," and then even for me, I had someone tell me, and I knew it was false, and I had to really kind of practice that of, "Well, you're gonna wake up with a colostomy bag because they're doing it on your bowels," and I was like, "Oh my gosh, no, I don't want that," and so but people who know how to maneuver around these organs know how to remove it without causing and there are some women who, you know, they be able to say, "That ovary, we saw it last time, we may have to take it," and talk about kind of consent before going into surgery. And, I think even in the consent forms, it'll say, "We could remove your appendix while you're in there if it's on there," and then you kind of consent to that. Which I didn't have to have mine removed, but I do remember signing it. "Yeah, sure, take it out."
Right. So you can kind of, and then you can refuse to sign a consent around, and then either the surgeon says, okay, we won't do a surgery at all, or they say, okay, and if there's something there, we can't wake you up to ask, so we're just not going to do it. And then that might mean some. So it's just about knowing it's informed consent, right? Knowing what the consequences are of each and every decision that's being made during surgery.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even in those times where it's a little too risky to take things out, even just leaving it in there and saying, "Hey, this is what we found. Maybe next surgery we talk about taking those ovaries out or we talk about kind of removing things." And I think that gives the patient the autonomy.
And again, like if you're really strapped on cash, then you might be forced to make a decision out of fear. Like, well, I don't want another surgery. I mean, we can't predict that you may or may not have one anyway, but so this is all, and again, this is where therapy comes in because you can take your time and this isn't the kind of surgery that you do have to, it's not like a heart attack where you have to have surgery right then and there or else you're going to die. You will be in pain, but you can take your time in making this decision with your therapist who, especially if they have lived experience or they just understand medical trauma and ha- making medical decisions should be slow and drawn out when it can be. Of course, again, heart attack, you got to make a decision right then and there. Like, but yeah, I mean, trauma in somatic experiencing, Peter Levine defines trauma as anything that happens too much, too fast for the nervous system. And so when we move it along faster than our nervous system can consider all the options, that is inherently traumatic. So let's slow it down. Would you agree with that?
100%. 100%. Yeah. And that also gives you that power back, right? Because so much of a woman's body, don't want to get on my soapbox, but so much of a woman's body is the decisions are made for them, not by them. And so having a surgeon, a medical team, a therapist, everyone who says, "This is your body, let's kind of prepare for this." Let's ask all the questions. That's something I do with my clients. So I'm like, "Okay, let's get a notebook. Let's write out all the questions. And if any surgeon wants to rush you or any doctor wants to rush you, maybe we look elsewhere because you are the expert there and you deserve to have all the answers." Um, and so I really do believe in pulling your power back and saying that my questions are valid and I deserve to have them answered.
Totally. Yeah. Even if at the very least, we just understand that having time with questions being asked and answered, even if your surgeon thinks it's a silly question, or even if you think it's a silly question, just giving it the time can reduce the impact of um, trauma.
Yeah. And I think my second surgeon was trauma informed from the moment you walked in the door, the moment you picked up the phone. That entire office was trauma informed. You get a robe to wear. She gives you a robe. And so that's something so small too, is because women are used to being in these paper towels that tear and they're not feminine. They're disgusting. And it just kind of just doesn't make you feel like a woman. And, there's the things that she did, the touch, the hugs, just the things that she did was so different. The smell of her office. I talk a lot with my trauma folks is the lighting. all of our five senses are activated when we're in somewhere to hear the beeping noises and to see those nasty fluorescent lights. Of course, that happened in the hospital, but not in her office. Her office, I spent over an hour with her the 2 times that I met her. She was not in any hurry, and so I think that when you find someone who actually sits down and listens to you, it can change your entire journey in the medical field 110%. Something I really work with my clients is I'm going to be as real and personal as possible, which is why I'm like, "Oh, no, I had endometriosis surgery." Most of my clients were with me through both of them, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're having surgery again?" And they would, check on me. I'm like, "Oh, I wanna show them that I'm a human too, and that I have this lived experience, and that I know what it's like when a woman says, 'I had to go to the doctor, and I'm still fighting this.'" I think it just really strengthens the therapeutic relationship more than anything I learned in school or anything I've learned outside of school could have ever taught me.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I mean, thank you for sharing all of what you shared today, because there's just so many aspects of the story that I do know people are either it's going to spark a curiosity for them, or it's going to answer a question that they already had, or like there's so much here. So, the last question I have around this is, what symptoms do you still experience? I have two more questions. What symptoms do you still experience post surgery? And are there any emotional connections to symptoms that you can speak to?
Yeah, so post-surgery, the fatigue is really bad. I chronic illness comes with its level of fatigue, but the fatigue is probably the worst, like the dip in energy levels. And I think just kind of the sporadic day-to-day changes of today I feel great, tomorrow I could be a totally different person on a heating pad. I do still have I don't actually have a full menstrual cycle anymore due to birth control, but I still, obviously have the ovulation and certain things during the month where, I do feel a dip in my energy. I do feel kind of the cramping. And my leg was always one of my um biggest pains, and all of my pain is left sided. So I still have that. I still have some hip pain if I do certain things. It's really kind of post-op has been about listening to my body and recognizing I can't do what I did before because it's hurtful, not helpful. And so I think for me the fatigue is probably been the biggest thing. Which I'm working on through, a lot of folks are vitamin D deficient. So I really highly encourage folks to get their labs checked with their primary care because I think most Americans are vitamin D deficient, but that's also impacting me, which is something I didn't know before. And so hopefully that improves. But a lot of folks are just, nutrient deficient. And so even getting your labs checked to say, okay, this might be why I'm tired as well. Also, pain obviously makes us tired. And then your second question about the emotional ties. I think there's still some anxiety going to a provider, and just anxiety around when a medical bill comes in or, oh my gosh, kind of, I try not to live in waiting for the other shoe to fall. Um, but it's kind of that when you get a flare up for me, and I've heard my friends say it who have endo, I've heard my clients say it, I get scared that it's going to happen again. It's going to happen too soon. Um, and so I think kind of that fear around when you do have a flare up, a heightened pain day of what if it doesn't end? And so I really, I lean on my own therapist, I lean on my own supports, but I think it's really, really helpful to say this treatment did work for me. These are the tools that I'm working for, and I'm literally learning my body all over again. Because my body changed with surgery. They don't tell women that their hair falls out with anesthesia. Your body will change. And so you physically look different. And so I think for me, it's what can my life look like now that this disease is removed for now? And leaning into that every single day.
That makes so much sense. I so appreciate the candidness and the thorough, like, nuance to this conversation. That is always what I'm looking for in these interviews. And I think that that's how our stories should be shared, not like this super toxic positivity, like everything is well, everything is, unless it is great, but like, yeah. Thank you so much for that. Is there anything else you want to leave people with? Let people know where they can find you as well and what
Yeah.
you offer outside of individual sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I can also give you my information, but you're welcome to, like Google me or search on Psychology Today. It's under Brianna Crisp, and I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I do run endometriosis groups for folks who don't have to have a diagnosis to be in my group. It's more education focused and kind of around what I talked about is how do we advocate, how do we navigate systems. And so I offer that, and that's on Psychology Today as well. And then I really just want to leave the listeners with, please don't give up on yourself. You're not making this up. You know your body better than anyone. Do the research. Research these providers. Make sure that they're doing the gold standard treatment. And if one surgery wasn't successful or your second surgery wasn't successful, keep trying. That it's not all in your head. I wanted to give up, and I sit with people who do want to give up, and don't let them win. You're worth betting on.
Thanks for listening. If you learned something new today, consider writing it down in your phone notes or journal and make that new neural pathway light up. Better yet, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a DM on Instagram, email me, or leave a voice memo for us to play on the next show. The way you summarize your takeaways can be the perfect little soundbite that someone else might need. And lastly, leaving a review really helps others find this podcast, so please do if you found this episode helpful. And P.S., clicking subscribe ensures you'll be here for the next episode. See you then.